Doctor, are you listening?
Imagine this. You're a psychiatrist. Your life is a world of logic, of diagnostics, of explainable phenomena within the human mind. A patient sits across from you, and they begin to tell you a story so impossible, so far outside the bounds of known psychology that it threatens to shatter your entire understanding of reality. Today, we are opening the confidential files on 4 true, terrifying stories, told not by the patients, but by the very doctors who heard them. The professionals, who were left questioning their own sanity. The ultimate fear for a doctor of the mind is to encounter a sickness they cannot diagnose, a horror they cannot explain away with a prescription or a theory. It's the terrifying, isolating moment when you are forced to confront the possibility that what your patient is describing is not a delusion, not a hallucination, but a real event, a reality that is far more terrifying than any psychosis. It is the silent, professional dread of knowing you are the last line of defense between your patient and the abyss, only to realize the abyss is staring right back at you. But what do these impossible cases reveal about our world? By exploring these real accounts from doctors on the front lines of the human psyche, from a patient who could hear a therapist's thoughts, to 2 strangers who shared the exact same nightmare, we will question the very line that separates what is real from what is madness. These stories are a chilling look at the moments when the doctor becomes the one who is truly terrified. Now, before we begin our session, make sure you are subscribed to Whispered Fear and have activated the bell. You don't want to miss your appointment with the unknown.
Your fear.
Our first story comes from a place of supposed sanity, the quiet, controlled environment of a psychiatrist's office. It's a story from a doctor, a man who believed every human fear could be mapped, categorized, and understood. He learned in the most terrifying way possible that some thoughts are not your own, and that the most profound violation is not when a stranger breaks into your home, but when they are invited into your mind and refuse to leave. Dr. Alistair Finch was a man who listened to ghosts for a living, not the spectral kind, but the ghosts of trauma, of grief, of the quiet, unseen wounds that dictate the course of a human life. At 48, he was a respected psychiatrist in San Francisco, his practice located in a beautiful, historic Victorian on Union Street in the Cow Hollow neighborhood. His office was a carefully constructed sanctuary of calm, shelves lined with academic texts, a large Persian rug that absorbed all sound, 2 deep leather armchairs facing each other like silent, patient combatants. He was a man of science, of empathy, of a deep and abiding belief in the power of the human mind to heal itself. His life was a testament to order and control, a necessary fortress against the chaotic, emotional storms of his patients. His own life was a quiet, solitary affair. He had been divorced for a decade, a casualty of his own professional dedication. He lived in a sleek, modern high-rise in the Rincon Hill neighborhood, a glass tower with a stunning panoramic view of the Bay Bridge. This view was his one true and deeply private vulnerability. He had a profound, irrational, and lifelong fear of bridges. A secret he had never shared with a single patient. A fear born from a forgotten childhood incident on a rickety wooden bridge in the backwoods of Oregon. It was a small, ridiculous fear for a man of his intellect, a tiny, locked room in the otherwise orderly mansion of his mind. The patient who would pick that lock arrived on a Tuesday morning. His name was Thomas, a young man in his early 20s, referred to him by a new and slightly mysterious corporate wellness program for a local tech startup. The file was thin, generalized anxiety and social withdrawal. Thomas himself was an enigma. He was pale, thin, with a strange, unnerving stillness about him. His eyes, a flat, neutral gray, seemed to see everything and nothing at all. He spoke in a quiet, hesitant monotone, his answers to Alistair's questions brief and unrevealing. For the first few sessions, Alistair made little progress. Thomas was a fortress, a locked room with no visible keyhole. The first impossible event, The first crack in the foundation of Alistair's reality happened in their fourth session. Alistair was listening to Thomas describe a mundane event from his week, but his own mind had drifted. He was thinking about his grocery list, specifically about the expensive artisan olive oil he had forgotten to buy at the ferry building farmers market over the weekend. It was a fleeting, insignificant, internal thought. Thomas, in the middle of his own sentence, suddenly stopped. He looked at Alistair, his gray eyes clear and focused for the first time. He said, his voice the same, flat monotone, "Don't worry about the olive oil. The one from the McAvoy Ranch stall. You can get it next week. It's not important." Alistair stared at him, his pen frozen above his notepad. The air in the room seemed to grow cold, to thin. He could feel a strange, buzzing sensation in his ears. He must have misheard him. Or had he said something aloud, muttered it under his breath? Alistair said, his voice a carefully controlled instrument of professional calm. "I'm sorry, Thomas. What did you just say?" Thomas just blinked, his expression returning to its usual vacant neutrality. "I was just saying, I don't like to go outside much," he said, as if the last 10 seconds had never happened. Alistair sat there for the rest of the session, his mind a screaming chaos of disbelief. He had not spoken. He had not moved. The thought had been a silent, internal, and utterly private event. And this strange, quiet boy on the other side of the room had plucked it, with a surgeon's precision, directly from his mind. He reviewed the session's audio recording, later that night, a habit he kept for all his patients. The recording was clean. There was no mention of olive oil, just a strange 10-second pause in the middle of Thomas's rambling. He dismissed it. A coincidence, a bizarre, statistically improbable but ultimately meaningless coincidence. It was the only explanation that allowed his world to remain intact. But the coincidences continued, and they grew more specific, more intimate, more impossible. In their next session, Alistair was feeling a pang of guilt. He had missed his sister's phone call that morning, a call he knew was important. As he was formulating a mental note to call her back after the session, Thomas, who had been staring silently at the wall, spoke. "Your sister will understand," he said, his voice a quiet murmur. "She knows you're busy. Just remember to call her before her flight to San Diego tonight." Every detail was correct. Alistair's carefully constructed professional composure began to crumble. This was not a coincidence. This was not a guess. This was knowledge. He started to feel a profound, terrifying sense of violation. The sanctity of the therapeutic space, a space built on a foundation of privacy and trust, had been breached. But how? He began to suspect he was being bugged. The thought was a comfort in a strange way. A bug was a physical object, a problem that could be found and solved. He hired a private security firm, a discreet and expensive company that specialized in corporate counter-surveillance. 2 technicians swept his office, his home, his car. They used the latest technology. They found nothing. The rooms were clean. The knowledge that he was not being bugged was, in many ways, more terrifying than the alternative. If the information wasn't coming from a hidden microphone, where was it coming from? The logical conclusion was that it was coming from him, that he, a respected and experienced psychiatrist, was having a breakdown, projecting his own thoughts onto his quiet, enigmatic patient. The fear was no longer of an external threat, but of his own fracturing mind. He was a man of science. He decided to conduct an experiment. He would control the variables. Before his next session with Thomas, he wrote down a single, specific, and completely random phrase on a piece of paper. "The yellow horse runs at midnight." He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. It was a thought that had no connection to his life, his memories, his anxieties. It was a piece of pure, manufactured data. He sat in his armchair waiting for Thomas to arrive. The session began with its usual quiet stillness. After about 20 minutes of silence, Alistair focused his entire conscious mind on the phrase. He repeated it, over and over, in his own head. "The yellow horse runs at midnight." The yellow horse runs at midnight. Thomas, who had been staring at his own hands, slowly looked up. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. He said, his voice a flat, emotionless sound. "That's a silly sentence. Horses can't be yellow, and they are usually asleep. At midnight." The world seemed to dissolve into a roaring white noise. It was not a guess. It was not a coincidence. It was not a projection. It was real. This boy, this quiet, broken, and impossible boy, could hear his thoughts. The sessions transformed from therapy into a quiet, polite, and deeply terrifying form of psychological torture. Alistair was no longer the doctor. He was the patient. He was a specimen, trapped in a glass box with a creature that could see every flicker of his consciousness. Thomas never used his ability in a threatening way. He would just comment. He would correct Alistair's internal grammar. He would offer an opinion on a private, fleeting thought about another patient. He was a silent, constant, and utterly invasive co-pilot in Alistair's own mind. The final shattering revelation came during what would be their last session. Alistair had decided he had to terminate their relationship. He was a danger to the patient, and the patient was a danger to his sanity. He was explaining, in a calm, professional tone, that he felt he could no longer help Thomas and would be referring him to a colleague, when the boy interrupted him. Thomas asked, his voice still a quiet, neutral monotone, but the words themselves a weapon of profound and intimate violence. "Is it because I know about the bridge?" Alistair froze, his own words dying in his throat. The bridge. The one true and deeply buried secret of his soul. Thomas continued, his gray eyes fixed on Alistair's, showing no emotion at all. The old wooden one, the one over the river back in Oregon, the one with the missing plank. You were 10. Leo was 6. You were supposed to be watching him. You dared him to run across. You told him not to be a baby. He was so small and so fast. He paused, letting the silence in the room become a heavy, suffocating thing. You remember the sound, don't you, Alistair? The sound of the wood, splintering. And then, the splash. You remember looking down through the hole and seeing his little red jacket in the dark, swirling water below. You remember not jumping in. You remember just standing there, frozen. Every word was a perfect, precise, and surgical strike, cutting away the layers of denial and time, exposing the raw, septic wound of his life's greatest trauma, a trauma he had never, not once, allowed himself to fully remember, let alone speak of. Alistair whispered, the last of his professional and personal identity stripped away, leaving only the terrified 10-year-old boy on the bridge. How? Thomas just looked at him, his expression unchanging. And then, for the first time, he did something out of the ordinary. He reached up and gently tapped a small, almost invisible, flesh-colored patch behind his own ear. He said, "The connection is very clear today, Doctor. The latency is almost zero." And in that moment, Alistair understood. The voice of his boss, Davies, from a different story, echoed in his mind. "We use a proprietary service, a firm called Erebus Analytics. This wasn't a patient, this wasn't a psychic. This was a product demonstration." Alistair demanded, his voice a raw, ragged sound. "Who are you?" Thomas said, his voice still flat but with a new, subtle undertone. A hint of pride, "I'm a beta tester. For a new kind of data analysis. They call it effective computing, real-time biometric and emotional response analysis." He gestured vaguely around the pristine, quiet office. "The technology is not in me, Doctor. It's in the room. The new air purifier in the corner? It's not an air purifier, it's a sensor suite. It's reading your heart rate, your respiration, your galvanic skin response. The new modern art on the wall? It's not art. The frame contains a series of micro-cameras tracking your pupil dilation, your saccadic eye movements, your micro-expressions, your own personal smartwatch. It's feeding them your real-time EKG." He leaned forward. "I don't hear your thoughts, Doctor. No one can. But they can. They can read the physiological, involuntary, and utterly honest language of your body. They see a spike in your heart rate, a 0.02 millimeter dilation of your pupils, a subconscious flicker of the muscles around your eyes when you think of your sister, and a powerful predictive AI correlates that data with your known history, your digital footprint, everything. It then translates that data, that emotional response, into a high-probability linguistic output. A best guess of what you are thinking. He smiled, a thin, cold, and humorless smile. And their guess is very, very good. He tapped the patch behind his ear again. And I am just the user interface. I have a small subcutaneous earpiece. They feed me the line, and I just say it. The final horrifying truth was not that the boy could read his mind. It was that his own traitorous body was screaming his thoughts into the silent, listening air, and that a machine, 100 miles away in a dark server farm, was listening and translating. Alistair said, his voice a dead, empty sound. This was a demonstration, a sales pitch. Thomas said, standing up. A very successful one. Our client was very impressed. They wanted to see if our technology could break a subject with a Class A, security clearance, and a high level of psychological resilience. And you, Doctor, you were a perfect test case. He walked to the door. The company that referred me? They are going to be our biggest client. They are in the business of risk management, just like you. He paused at the door, turning back to look at the shattered man in the leather armchair. Thank you for your time, Doctor. It has been a very insightful series of sessions. And then he was gone. Alistair was left alone. In his quiet, beautiful, and utterly violated sanctuary, he looked around the room at the art on the wall, at the air purifier in the corner. They were no longer just objects. They were eyes. They were listeners. His profession, his entire life, was built on the sanctity of the private, internal world of the human mind, and he now knew, with a certainty that was a new and permanent kind of terror, that that world no longer existed. Privacy was an illusion. The mind was no longer a locked room. It was just another data stream to be monitored, analyzed, and ultimately weaponized. And he was left with the chilling, final, and inescapable truth. In the modern world, you don't need to be a psychic to read someone's mind. You just need the right software.
We had the same dream.
Our next story is about the thin, fragile barrier between our own private worlds of thought and dream. It comes from a therapist, Dr. Evelyn Reed, a woman who believed every nightmare was a unique fingerprint of an individual's trauma. She learned, in the most unsettling way possible, that sometimes a nightmare is not a personal ghost. It is a shared memory. A memory of a real place, a real event, and a real monster. And she discovered that two complete strangers, separated by years and a city of millions, were still trapped in the same dark, terrifying room. Dr. Evelyn Reed's office was a sanctuary of quiet, ordered calm. Located in a charming older building in the Fremont neighborhood of Seattle, Washington, her practice was a haven for those whose minds had become a battleground. At 42, she was a highly respected psychologist specializing in trauma and PTSD. Her world was one of empathy, of careful listening, and of the profound, almost sacred, trust that existed in the space between her and her patients. Her office on North 36th Street was a testament to her methods. Soft, indirect lighting, comfortable, mismatched armchairs, and walls adorned not with diplomas, but with the abstract, therapeutic art of former patients. She believed with a deep scientific conviction that every human mind was a unique, sovereign territory. Her life outside the office was a quiet, solitary affair. She lived in a small modern condo in Belltown, a place of clean lines and minimalist furniture that served as a sterile palate cleanser after a day spent navigating the complex, often chaotic landscapes of her patients' minds. She was a woman who valued boundaries, both professional and personal. Her own mind, she believed, was a secure, well-guarded fortress. The first patient, Liam, was a classic Seattle archetype, a 28-year-old software developer for Amazon. He was a man of logic, of code, of a world that operated on a clear, binary system of cause and effect. He had come to her suffering from a crippling anxiety that had begun to affect his high-pressure job. His symptoms were textbook: insomnia, panic attacks, an irrational fear of enclosed spaces, and a recurring nightmare. He'd explained in their first session, his voice a flat, analytical monotone, as if he were describing a bug in a piece of software. It's always the same. I'm in a hallway. It's dark, but not completely. There's a reddish, emergency light casting. Long shadows. The walls are concrete and they're sweating. The air smells like rust and ozone and something else, something sweet, like rotting flowers. I'm not alone. I can hear something behind me, a sound like wet fabric dragging on the floor, but I know I can't look back. I have to get to the door at the end of the hall. Evelyn had asked, her pen moving smoothly across her notepad. And what is the door like? It's red, he'd said. A heavy steel fire door, and there's a number on it, painted in black. The number 13. For 6 weeks, they worked on the nightmare, treating it as a classic anxiety dream, a manifestation of the pressure he felt at his job. The dark hallway was his career path, the unseen pursuer, his fear of failure, the locked door, his feeling of being trapped. It was a neat, logical, and textbook interpretation, and it was completely wrong. The second patient, Chloe, was the antithesis of Liam. She was a 24-year-old barista at a Cafe Vita in Capitol Hill, an artist, a poet, a young woman who saw the world in vibrant, emotional color. She had come to Evelyn seeking help for a deep, unshakable depression that had left her unable to paint. And she, too, had a recurring nightmare. She described it. Not in terms of logic, but of pure sensory terror. She'd whispered in their first session, her eyes wide with a remembered fear. I'm in this place. And the feeling is what I can't shake. It's a feeling of absolute hopeless dread. The air is cold and wet, and it smells so wrong, like a penny in your mouth and old dead flowers. And there's a sound, a buzzing, like a million trapped flies. Evelyn listened, a familiar professional empathy washing over her. Chloe continued, her voice dropping lower. And there's a door. A big, red door. It's so angry. It's the color of a fresh wound, and it has a number on it. A cold, tiny, and utterly unprofessional prickle of unease ran down Evelyn's spine. What number, Chloe? 13, she whispered. And I know I have to get through it. But I'm so scared, because there's something in the hall with me, something wet and heavy, and it's getting closer. Evelyn sat there, her professional mask of calm neutrality firmly in place, but behind it, her mind was a screaming chaos. The similarities were impossible. The concrete, sweating walls, the smell of rust and rotting flowers, the red door, the number 13, the unseen dragging presence. It wasn't a similar dream, it was the same dream. Her first thought was that she was mistaken, that she was conflating the two accounts, her own mind creating a pattern where there was none. That night she went through her session notes, her hands shaking slightly. But the notes were clear, her own handwriting a testament to the impossible truth. Liam, the logical coder, and Chloe, the emotional artist, two complete strangers who had never met, who had no social or professional connections, were having the exact same, highly specific, and deeply traumatic nightmare. The scientific, ordered world of her profession had no explanation for this. Folie à deux, a shared psychosis, required the subjects to be in close contact, to feed off each other's delusions. This was something else. This was a statistical impossibility, a ghost in the data of her own practice. The investigation became her quiet, secret obsession. She was bound by the sacred legal and ethical laws of patient confidentiality. She could not tell Liam about Chloe. She could not tell Chloe about Liam. She was the sole keeper of this impossible secret. A silent, terrified observer of a phenomenon that defied all the books on her shelves. She began to use her sessions as a form of forensic analysis. She would ask Liam a specific probing question about the dream. "The floor, Liam. What is the floor like?" "It's concrete," he'd say. "But there are cracks, a specific pattern of cracks like a spider web starting from the base of the wall on the left." The next day, she would ask Chloe to draw the room from her dream, and Chloe would draw, with a trembling artistic hand, the exact same spider web pattern of cracks on the floor. The details became more specific, more bizarre, more undeniable. Liam, in a session, mentioned a sound. "The buzzing," he'd said, "like a faulty fluorescent light." Chloe, in her next session, described the same sound but in her own sensory language. She'd whispered, "It's the sound of a trapped, angry insect." Evelyn felt like she was losing her own mind. Was she somehow unconsciously feeding them the details, projecting her own anxiety onto her patients? The thought was a professional and personal nightmare. She began to record her sessions, with her patient's permission, a desperate need for an objective, verifiable record. The recordings only confirmed the impossible. She was not leading them. They were leading her, independently, to the same dark, terrible place. The breakthrough, the clue that would finally shatter the walls of the nightmare and reveal the even more terrifying reality behind it, came from a sound. During a particularly intense session, using a guided imagery technique, she was walking Liam through the dark, concrete hallway of the dream. She asked, her voice a soft, steady anchor, "What else do you hear, Liam?" "Don," he said, his eyes closed, his body tense. "The buzzing, the dragging sound, and something else. It's very faint. It's a song." "A song?" he whispered, a look of profound confusion on his face. "A children's song, from a TV show. Oh, really stupid old TV show. I haven't thought about it in years." He began to hum the tune, a simple, repetitive, and slightly annoying jingle. Evelyn's heart began to pound. It was the key, an external, verifiable piece of data. "What show? Liam, do you remember the name?" he said, his eyes snapping open. "Fuzzy's Playhouse." Oh my God. It was a show called Fuzzy's Playhouse. That night, Evelyn did not sleep. She sat at her computer, the city lights of Seattle a distant, blurry backdrop, and she went hunting. Fuzzy's Playhouse was not an easy thing to find. It wasn't a national show. After hours of digging through obscure 90s-era television archives, she found it. It had been a low-budget, local-access children's show, produced and aired by a single small-market television station, Coin TV, in Portland, Oregon, and it had only aired for one season, in the summer of 1999. She pulled up Liam's and Chloe's intake forms, her hands shaking, their personal histories, their hometowns. Liam had grown up in a suburb of Boise, Idaho. Chloe, in a small town outside of San Diego, California. They had no connection to Portland. She was about to give up, to file this away as another layer of the impossible mystery, when she decided to dig deeper. Not into where they had grown up, but where they had been. She submitted a background check request, a standard procedure for certain trauma cases. The results came back 2 days later, and in the dry, bureaucratic text of the two reports, she found the connection, the single, terrifying, and heartbreaking thread that tied her two strangers together. In the summer of 1999, both Liam, then aged 8, and Chloe, then aged 6, had been, for a brief, overlapping period of 2 weeks, patients at the same hospital, the Randall Children's Hospital at Legacy Emanuel in Portland, Oregon. They had both been there for a common, but serious, childhood respiratory illness, and they had both been on the same floor, the third floor, a small isolated ward for children with infectious diseases. Evelyn felt a profound, chilling certainty wash over her. The shared nightmare wasn't a psychic connection. It was a shared, repressed memory, a memory of a real place. She began a new, more frantic line of research. She searched for news articles, for records, anything related to the hospital from that specific summer, and she found it. A small, tragic article from the Oregonian newspaper dated July 12, 1999. The headline read, "Fire at Legacy Emanuel. Children evacuated." The article described a small electrical fire that had broken out in a utility closet on the third floor of the children's hospital. The fire had been contained quickly, but it had filled the isolated, sealed-off ward with a thick black smoke. The power had gone out. The emergency lights had flickered on, casting a dim red glow. The fire alarms, a loud buzzing sound, had shrieked. The nurses, in a heroic effort, had evacuated the dozen children on the floor, some of them having to be dragged on their mattresses, down a dark concrete service hallway to a single heavy red fire door at the end, marked with the number 13. Every single detail from the nightmare was there. The dark concrete hallway, the red emergency light, the smell of ozone from the electrical fire, the smell of wilting flowers in vases in the rooms, the buzzing of the fire alarm, the wet, dragging sound of the mattresses on the floor, and the red door. Number 13. The children had been safe. They had been evacuated. No one was seriously injured, but they had been terrified, trapped in a dark, smoky hallway with a sound they couldn't understand, being dragged towards a red door by panicked, shadowy figures. It was a real, tangible, and deeply traumatic event. An event that the young, terrified minds of a 6-year-old girl and an 8-year-old boy had buried so deep, it had festered in their subconscious for 20 years, emerging only as a shared, symbolic nightmare. And the TV show? Fuzzy's Playhouse? The hospital in there. An effort to keep the children calm, had been playing it on the televisions in the ward around the clock. The simple, repetitive, and annoying jingle had been the soundtrack to their shared trauma. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, and Evelyn was left with a truth that was both a profound relief and a new, more intimate kind of horror. She was not dealing with a supernatural event. She was dealing with the long, dark, and incredibly powerful shadow of a real one. She now had a choice. She could tell them. She could unravel the mystery, explain the source of their shared nightmare, and in doing so, force them to confront a real, buried trauma they were not prepared to face. Or she could keep the secret and try to treat the nightmare as a simple dream, a fiction, a ghost. She chose the truth. The process was long, difficult, and painful. For both Liam and Chloe, the revelation that their most private, internal horror was a real shared event was a seismic shock. But it was also a liberation. The monster in their dream now had a name. It had a time and a place. It was no longer a phantom. It was a memory. And memories, unlike ghosts, can be understood. They can be processed. They can be healed. Evelyn is left with a profound and deeply unsettling new understanding of her own profession. She now knows that the human mind, in its desperate need to protect itself, can bury a trauma so deep that it becomes a ghost, a myth, a shared nightmare. She is left with the knowledge that we are all connected, not by psychic threads, but by the shared and often forgotten geography of our own pasts, and she is haunted by a single, chilling, and unanswerable question. How many other nightmares, shared by how many other strangers, are not dreams at all, but just the quiet, persistent, and terrifying echoes of a real event, a real place, and a real forgotten room?
He's not one you should be afraid of.
Our third story comes from the front lines of the battle for the human mind. It's a story from a young, ambitious psychiatrist, Dr. Samuel Carter, a man who believed that every ghost, every demon, was simply a metaphor, a symptom of a tangible, diagnosable illness. He learned, in the quiet, sterile room of a psychiatric hospital, that he was wrong. Not because demons are real, but because the human mind, when it fractures, can create a monster far more intelligent, far more observant, and far more dangerous than any myth. At 32, Dr. Samuel Carter was the new rising star at Shepherd Pratt. the historic and highly respected psychiatric hospital in Baltimore, Maryland. He was a man driven by a profound, almost religious belief in the power of modern psychiatry. He saw the human mind as a complex but ultimately solvable machine. Every delusion, every psychosis, was a ghost that could be exorcised with the right combination of therapy and medication. He had come to shepherd Pratt from a residency at Johns Hopkins, eager to make his mark, to take on the most difficult, the most unreachable cases. His ambition was a bright, burning thing, a shield against the quiet, gnawing insecurities that came with being a young doctor in a world of seasoned veterans. He had a fiancée, a comfortable apartment in the Mount Vernon neighborhood, and a future that seemed as bright and as well-ordered as the textbooks that lined his office shelves. His chance to prove himself came in the form of a patient file, dropped on his desk with a sigh of weary resignation by his supervising physician. The patient was a young woman, listed as Jane Doe, who had been a resident at the hospital for over 5 years. She was a classic and tragic case of dissociative identity disorder, or DID, with a complex system of over a dozen distinct personalities, or alters. She had been found as a teenager, a runaway with no memory of her past, and had been in the system ever since. She was considered treatment-resistant. Her primary personality was a scared, almost mute girl who called herself Mouse. The other alters were a chaotic mix of frightened children and angry, protective teenagers. None of them had been able to shed any light on the original trauma that had shattered her mind. She was a locked room, and the other doctors had all but given up on finding the key. For Samuel, she was the ultimate challenge. The first few months of his sessions with Jane were a study in frustration. He would sit in his quiet, sunlit office, his voice a calm, patient instrument, and he would get nothing. Mouse, the primary alter, would just sit in the armchair, huddled into a small ball, her eyes wide with a silent animal terror. The other alters would emerge sporadically, lashing out with childish anger or teenage contempt, but they offered no insight, no path forward. Samuel was a man of science, a man who believed in patterns, but here, there was only chaos. His colleagues pitied him. One of the older doctors had told him over coffee at the hospital's cafeteria, "Don't waste your energy, Sam. Some of them are just lost forever." But Samuel refused to believe it. He was going to be the one to break through. The breakthrough, when it came, was not what he had expected. It was not a tearful confession or a recovered memory. It was an arrival. It was a Tuesday afternoon. He was in a session with Mouse, who was in her usual silent state. He was asking a gentle, probing question about her feelings of safety when she suddenly went rigid in her chair. Her head snapped up, her terrified, childlike expression vanishing, replaced by a look of profound and utterly serene calm. She slowly, gracefully uncurled her body, sat up straight, and placed her hands neatly in her lap. She looked at him, but it was not with Mouse's eyes. These eyes were different. They were intelligent, ancient, and filled with a cold, detached amusement. She said, "Hello, doctor." Her voice was not the frightened whisper of a child. It was a low, smooth, androgynous voice, a voice that seemed to hold a quiet, chilling authority. Samuel asked, his professional training kicking in, his heart beginning a slow, heavy beat. "And who might you be?" He was meeting a new alter. The woman smiled, a slow, cold, and humorless smile. "You can call me Mammon," she said. "I'm the one who watches," Samuel said, his voice a mask of clinical calm. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mammon. What is it that you watch?" The voice replied, the smile never leaving her lips. "Everything. I watch the doctors and their little secrets. I watch the nurses and their quiet desperation. I watch this whole sad, broken little world." She leaned forward, her intelligent eyes boring into his. "I watch you, Dr. Carter." The sessions with Mammon became the new, terrifying center of Samuel's professional life. This alter was unlike any he had ever encountered or read about. It was not a fragment of a traumatized child. It was a fully formed, highly intelligent, and deeply cynical personality, and it claimed to be a demon. A claim that Samuel, the man of science, immediately diagnosed as a classic, grandiose delusion, a common feature in complex psychiatric cases. The delusion was the symptom. The underlying trauma was the disease. He just had to find it. But Mammon was not interested in talking about Jane's trauma. He was interested in talking about everyone else's. The first impossible revelation was a small one. He was talking about another doctor on the floor, a Dr. Evans, a man Samuel respected, Mammon said, his voice a low conversational purr. A good man, but he carries a heavy burden. The guilt over his affair with the head nurse from the 3rd floor is eating him alive. He thinks no one knows, but I know. I see the way they look at each other in the hallway when they think no one is watching. Samuel just nodded, making a note on his pad, dismissing the comment as a lucky guess, a piece of hospital gossip that one of Jane's other, more lucid alters must have overheard. But the next week, Dr. Evans, a married father of 3, quietly resigned, and the head nurse from the 3rd floor was transferred to a different hospital. A quiet, professional separation that was, to anyone who knew the truth, a clear admission of guilt. The revelations became more specific, more impossible. Mammon would reveal the hidden gambling debts of a specific orderly, the secret drinking problem of a particular therapist, the quiet, desperate acts of 100 different people, all of whom believed their secrets were safe. The information was always, without fail, 100% accurate. Samuel was no longer just a psychiatrist. He was a confessor, a keeper of the entire hospital's sins, and he was terrified. He was bound by the sacred laws of patient confidentiality. He could not share what he was learning. He was a silent, unwilling accomplice to this entity's omniscience. He began a frantic secret investigation. How was this happening? He reviewed the security footage from the hallways. Jane, in her mouse state, never spoke to anyone. She just shuffled from her room to the common area and back again. He interviewed the nurses, the orderlies. They all said the same thing. She was a quiet, broken, and completely isolated patient. There was no physical way she could be gathering this information. His logical, scientific worldview was beginning to crumble. He was left with 2 equally terrifying possibilities. Either this alter, this Mammon, was a genuine, supernatural, and telepathic entity, a demon who could read the souls of the people around him, or the patient Jane was the most brilliant, manipulative, and sociopathic intelligence gatherer he had ever encountered. He didn't know which explanation was more frightening. The final shattering confrontation came on a cold, winter afternoon. Samuel had decided he had to break through. He had to confront the demon delusion head-on. Samuel said, his voice a firm clinical instrument. You are not a demon, Mammon. You are a part of Jane, a part that was created to protect her, a part that has developed a brilliant but ultimately delusional way of understanding the world. You are not supernatural. Mammon just looked at him, that cold, amused smile on her lips. Her voice was a soft, pitying sound. Oh, doctor. You believe so strongly in your own little logical world. You believe that every secret, every sin, can be explained away by a theory in one of your dusty books. But you are a man of secrets. Yourself, aren't you, Dr. Carter? A cold, familiar dread began to pool in Samuel's stomach. Mammon continued, her voice a low, intimate whisper. Let's talk about your secret. Let's talk about your time at Johns Hopkins, your residency. Let's talk about the first patient you ever lost. A young man, a teenager, who came in with a simple, treatable case of meningitis. But you were tired. You were arrogant. You were the brilliant rising star and you missed the signs. A simple textbook case of bacterial meningitis, and you misdiagnosed it as a viral strain, a fatal and completely avoidable mistake. The air in the room became thick, heavy, impossible to breathe. The memory, a memory he had buried under a mountain of professional success and willful denial, was a raw, septic wound in his own soul. He had never spoken of it to anyone. The official review had cleared him. A tragic but non-negligent error, but he knew, in the deepest, most secret part of his heart, he knew he was guilty. Mammon whispered, her eyes boring into his. You remember his name, don't you, Samuel? You remember the mother's screams in the hallway when you told her? You remember the look in her eyes, the look of a woman whose world you had just with your own arrogant incompetence destroyed. Samuel stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He whispered, his voice a raw, broken sound. How? How do you know that? Mammon's smile faded, replaced by a look of something that was almost bored. Oh, please, doctor. You really are a simple machine, aren't you? You think in terms of demons and magic. The truth is so much more mundane and so much more terrifying. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a flat, clinical, and utterly human tone. Jane is not a demon, doctor, but she is a genius, prodigy. The trauma that broke her mind also unlocked it. Her primary alter, the one you call Mouse, she does not just see the world. She sees the patterns. She sees the data. She spends her days in the common room, not staring into space, but watching. She watches the way Dr. Evans never quite meets the head nurse's eyes. She sees the faint tremor in an orderly's hands as he passes the off-track. Betting results in the newspaper. She hears the whispers, the gossip, the quiet, desperate phone calls that the staff thinks no one can hear. Samuel whispered, "And me? How did you know about me?" Or Mammon said, a flicker of that old amused contempt in her eyes. "You were the easiest of all. You talk in your sleep." She gestured to the room. "This hospital, it's a fortress of secrets, but its digital security is a joke. A few years ago, Jane, or rather one of her more technical alters, found a way into the hospital's internal network, a simple, unpatched Wi-Fi router in the staff lounge. From there, she got into everything: security camera feeds, internal emails, digital patient records, even the audio logs from the hospital's own internal quality control system, a system that includes the always-on microphones in the patient rooms for safety and monitoring. The final, horrifying and deeply human truth of the demon, of the impossible knowledge, crashed down on Samuel. Jane wasn't a vessel for a supernatural entity. She was a human panopticon, a quiet, unassuming girl who had, from the silent, sterile prison of her own room, built a secret digital empire of information. Her alters were not just fragments of a broken mind. They were a specialized team, the scared child who could go unnoticed, the angry teenager who could intimidate, the technical prodigy who could hack the system, and Mammon. Mammon was the analyst, the cold, logical, and ruthless personality who could take all that stolen data, all those secrets, and weaponize them. The demon wasn't a spirit from hell. It was a terrifying fusion of profound mental illness and the cold, hard, and unforgiving reality of the digital age. Samuel whispered, a new and profound respect mingling with his terror. "You are a monster." Mammon just smiled, that cold, quiet smile. "No, doctor, I am not a monster. I am a survivor, and I am simply using the tools that this sad, broken world has given me." She stood up, her movements graceful, her session over. "And now, you are one of my tools as well. You are a keeper of secrets, just like me. You cannot tell anyone what you have learned today. To do so would be to admit your own past failures, to admit the hospital's gross incompetence, to destroy your own career. You are trapped, Dr. Carter. Welcome to the collection." She turned and walked to the door, her work done. Samuel was left alone in his quiet, sunlit office, a man who had just been dismantled, piece by agonizing piece. He was left with the knowledge that his patient was not just a patient. She was the most dangerous person in the entire hospital, and he was now her unwilling and eternal confessor. The horror was not that demons are real. The horror was that the human mind, when it breaks, can build a new god from the spare parts of our own forgotten and deeply insecure digital world.
He's right behind you.
Our final story is about the thin, fragile line between what is real And what is a delusion? It comes from Dr. Lena Petrova, a neurologist psychiatrist who learned that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not ghosts or demons, but the bizarre, inexplicable, and horrifying glitches in the wiring of the human brain. She discovered that an invisible visitor can be very, very real, and that the only thing worse than seeing a ghost on a security camera is seeing nothing at all. Dr. Lena Petrova's world was a map of the human brain. At 34, she was a rising star in the highly specialized field of neuropsychiatry at the University of California, San Francisco Medical Center, one of the top neurological research hospitals in the world. Her life was one of PET scans, of EEGs, of the quiet clinical beauty of mapping the complex electrical storms within a patient's skull. She was a woman of science, a detective whose crime scenes were the synapses and gray matter of the human mind. She did not believe in ghosts. She believed in misdiagnosed temporal lobe epilepsy, in tumors pressing on the parietal lobe, in the myriad of strange but ultimately explainable ways the brain could lie to its owner. Her sanctuary was the 5th floor of the hospital, the inpatient psychiatric ward. It was a place of quiet, controlled calm, of soft, muted colors and shatterproof glass. It was a world she understood, a world she could control. Her life outside, the hospital was a quiet, solitary affair. She lived in a small modern apartment in the Mission Bay neighborhood, a short, brisk walk from the UCSF campus. Her life was her work. The mysteries of the human mind were her only true passion. The patient who would challenge her entire understanding of that mystery was a man named Arthur Jones. He was 72 years old, a retired librarian, a widower, and a man of quiet, gentle dignity. He had been admitted to her ward after a series of falls at his home, brought in by his concerned son. Arthur's problem was not that he was falling. His problem was that he believed, with an absolute and unwavering certainty, that he was being pushed. Mr. Jones had explained in their first session, his voice a soft, cultured whisper. "He's always with me, doctor." He was not agitated. He was not psychotic. He was a rational, intelligent man describing an irrational reality. His name is Philip. He's tall, thin, and he follows me everywhere. Lena had asked, her pen moving across her notepad, the diagnosis already forming in her mind. "And what does Philip do, Arthur?" "A classic persecutory delusion, likely brought on by the early stages of dementia or a small, undiagnosed stroke," Arthur said, his gaze distant. "Most of the time he just watches, but sometimes he gets angry, he shoves me. He knocks the food from my hands. Last week he pushed me down the stairs." For the first few weeks, Lena treated the case by the book. She was kind, empathetic, but firm in her diagnosis. The invisible visitor, as she had dubbed him in her notes, was a textbook personification of Arthur's own anxieties about his declining health, his loss of control, his fear of becoming a burden. It was a sad, common, and completely understandable psychological coping mechanism. The falls were real, the bruises were real, but the cause, she believed, was internal, not external. But Arthur's case refused to fit neatly into the diagnostic boxes. His cognitive tests all came back normal. His brain scans showed no signs of a stroke, no tumor, no dementia. He was, by all medical accounts, a perfectly healthy, if slightly frail, 72-year-old man. And his delusion was strangely, stubbornly, consistent. He never embellished. He never contradicted himself. He just calmly, sadly, reported the daily quiet torments of his invisible companion. The nurses on the ward were fond of Arthur. He was a sweet, polite man, but they saw his episodes firsthand. One nurse reported seeing a tray of food suddenly fly from Arthur's hands and crash to the floor, with no one near him. Another saw him suddenly lurch sideways in the hallway, as if shoved and stumble into the wall. They all agreed. It was a sad, powerful, and deeply convincing delusion. Lena, however, was a scientist, and her data was becoming inconsistent. The man's mind was, by all accounts, healthy, but his reality was not. A seed of doubt, a tiny, unprofessional flicker of what if began to take root in her mind. She decided she needed an objective witness, a witness that could see what she and the nurses could not. She decided to use the ward's security cameras. The cameras in the hallways were always on, a standard part of hospital protocol. She told the nursing staff she wanted to review the footage, to better understand the environmental triggers that might be causing Arthur's falls. It was a small, professional lie, a shield for the strange, unsettling truth of her own growing uncertainty. That night, she sat in her quiet, darkened office, a cup of cold coffee at her elbow, and began to watch the silent, black and white world of the fifth-floor psychiatric ward. The footage was a study in profound and deeply boring silence. She watched hours of empty hallways of nurses making their quiet rounds, of the slow, rhythmic sweep of the janitor's mop. She found the first incident at 2:17 a.m. The footage showed Arthur walking slowly down the main corridor, on his way back from the bathroom. The hallway was empty. He was walking with his usual, slightly shuffling gait. He was calm. And then it happened. His body, without any warning, without any preamble, was thrown violently to his left. It was not a stumble. It was not a fall. It was a push. A powerful lateral shove, as if he had been hit by a linebacker. His small, frail body flew through the air and slammed into the wall, his head hitting the plaster with a sickening, silent impact. He crumpled to the floor, a still broken shape in the empty, silent hallway. Lena stared at the screen, her heart a cold, hard fist in her chest. She played the footage back, again and again, in slow motion, frame by agonizing frame. There was nothing there. No trip hazard on the floor, no sudden seizure, no spastic contortion of his limbs. His body in one frame was walking calmly. In the next, it was airborne, moving sideways at an impossible, unprovoked velocity. It was a perfect, clean, and utterly impossible push from a force that was not there. The world, her world, of logic, of science, of explainable phenomena, seemed to tilt on its axis. The footage was an objective, undeniable and terrifying piece of data that contradicted every single thing she knew about medicine, about physics, about the nature of reality itself. She spent the rest of the night reviewing the footage, searching for other incidents. She found two more. A moment in the common room where Arthur, sitting alone on a sofa, was suddenly and violently thrown forward, his face hitting the coffee table. A moment in the cafeteria line where the tray in his hands was not just dropped but was knocked upwards into the air, with a force that had to have come from below. In every case, the story was the same. A violent physical interaction with a force that was, according to the camera, not there. The next morning, she went into her session with Arthur a changed woman. Her professional certainty was gone, replaced by a profound and deeply unsettling humility. She was no longer a doctor treating a patient. She was an investigator, facing a witness. She began, her voice quiet. "Arthur, Philip, the man who follows you. I need you to tell me everything about him." Arthur just looked at her, and in his sad, tired eyes she saw a flicker of something new, a quiet, tragic validation. He whispered, "You saw him, didn't you, doctor? On your cameras." Lena replied, her voice barely a whisper. "I saw what he did, but I didn't see him." Arthur said with a sad, knowing smile, "No, you wouldn't. He's very shy." The investigation that followed was the most bizarre and challenging of Lena's career. She had a patient who was being physically assaulted by an invisible entity, and her only evidence was a series of impossible, terrifying videos. She was a woman of science, and she was faced with a phenomenon that seemed to belong to the world of the supernatural. But she refused to accept that. There had to be a logical explanation. An explanation that was hidden not in the world of ghosts, but in the complex and often terrifying world of the human body itself. She brought the case to a colleague, Dr. Ben Carter, a senior neurologist at UCSF and an old mentor of hers. She showed him the footage. He watched it, his face a mask of profound, scientific curiosity. He played the videos back over and over, just as she had. He said finally, his eyes still on the screen. "This is not a haunting, Lena. This is a rebellion." "What do you mean?" "I mean the force that is pushing him. It's not external. It's coming from inside his own body." Ben said, "It's a civil war between his mind and his own traitorous limbs." The diagnosis was a rare and deeply strange one, a severe and previously undocumented variant of alien hand syndrome, coupled with a small, difficult-to-detect lesion on his right parietal lobe. The parietal lobe is the part of the brain that creates our sense of self in space, that tells us where our body is, where the world is. Arthur's lesion was causing a profound and terrifying disconnect. His brain was sending out motor signals that his conscious mind was not aware of. His own muscles were performing complex, violent, and involuntary actions. But because of the lesion, his brain was not interpreting these actions as his own. It was interpreting them as an external force. His own, violent, full-body muscle spasms were being perceived by his conscious mind as a push from an outside entity. His mind, in its desperate need to make sense of a body that had become a traitor, had created a story, a coherent, detailed, and utterly logical, from its own broken perspective, delusion. The story of Philip, the invisible visitor. The monster wasn't a ghost. It was a symptom. The pushes weren't a haunting. They were the violent, spastic misfirings of his own damaged nervous system. The terror was real. The falls were real. The bruises were real. But the perpetrator was not a phantom. It was a tiny, insignificant, and catastrophic lesion, buried deep in the silent gray matter of his own brain. The diagnosis was a profound and deeply unsettling relief. The ghost had been found. It had a name. It had a cause. It was not a violation of the laws of physics, but a violation of the laws of biology. Arthur was transferred to the neurological ward. He was treated. The medication helped to control the spasms. The pushes became less frequent, less violent. But the story of Philip, the invisible visitor, remained. The delusion was now too deeply ingrained, the narrative too comforting for his mind to let it go. He still has conversations with his invisible companion. But now, he says, Philip is less angry, more peaceful. Lena is left with a new and far more terrifying understanding of the human mind. The case of Arthur Jones was a landmark in her career, but it left her with a permanent, chilling, and unshakable sense of doubt. She now knows that the line between the self and the other is a fragile neurological construct. She knows that our own bodies can become strangers to us, that our own limbs can become our most intimate and most violent enemies. She is haunted by the image from the security camera, the image of a man alone in a hallway, being thrown against a wall by a force that no one can see. And she is left with a final, chilling question that she asks herself every time she looks at a new patient, every time she looks at herself in the mirror. How much of what we call me is truly under our control? And what happens when a part of your own body decides, with a silent and terrifying violence, that it no longer wants to be a part of you? A rocking chair that moves with the rhythm of a forgotten routine, a perfume that hangs in the air, a fragrant ghost of a long-lost sister, and the heavy, lonely footsteps of a man walking an endless, tragic loop in an empty room above. These three stories share a common, deeply unsettling truth about apartment living. You are never just renting a space. You are inheriting the echoes of every life that has been lived and lost within those same four walls. The true horror of a haunted apartment is not just the presence of a ghost, but the absolute lack of privacy, even from the past. A house offers the illusion of a self-contained world, but an apartment is a hive, a collection of boxes stacked, one on top of the other, separated by a thin, fragile membrane of plaster and wood. The sounds, the smells, the very grief of your neighbors, both living and dead, can bleed through that membrane, becoming a part of your own story. These accounts leave us with a chilling realization. The silence in your apartment is never truly empty. It is just a pause. It is filled with the quiet, unheard stories of the strangers who came before you, the people who loved and wept and died, just a few inches from where you now sleep. And it forces us to ask a terrifying question. The next time you hear a strange sound from the apartment next door or from the floor above, how can you ever be sure that the person making it is still alive? If these stories have made you listen more closely to the silence of your own home, prove you're not just an echo by subscribing to Whispered Fear, leaving a like and sharing this video. Your support helps us give a voice to the stories that live in the walls. But what if the haunting isn't in the building you live in, but in the very minds of the people who are supposed to heal you? Click the video on your screen now as we open the confidential files for our next collection. Our true scary stories told by psychiatrists. See you there. The doctor is in.